Hi, and welcome to this RISE presentation about a fire in a multi-storey car park in Norway and its implication on fire regulations in Norway. So the fire we will be talking about today is at the Stavanger airport on 7th January 2020. And the follow-up study
is a simulation study on the opening degree of car park designs.
Yes, so let's get started. First, we at the RISE Fire Research, we're here in lovely Trondheim. We are an accredited test lab and inspection body, and we're owned by SINTEF and RISE in Sweden. And we are the center director for FIEP Fire Research and Innovation Center. So the fire we will be talking about today is in the southwest of Norway. And here you can see a close picture of an overview picture of the airport. Stavanger Airport is located outside of Stavanger, and it's an international airport. And it has the heliport for transportation to and from offshore platforms in Norway. There is about 82,000 arrivals and departures and 4.1 million passengers per year. And if we zoom in even more, you can see the car park here, and then it's surrounded of the terminal buildings. And the car park was built in 3 steps, building step A, B, and C. And today we will focus on building step B and C, since A was not involved in the fire. And at the bottom here you can see the wind direction. It was coming from south and towards north on the day. During the fire, parts of building C collapsed, and it was quite a special situation since on the day the Prime Minister was also on site at the heliport. The fire caused the airport to be closed for about 1 day, and the reason for this was that the airport fire service helped the local fire service in their extinguishing efforts. So let's start to look at the mitigation effort and the timeline of the early phases of the fire. So at 3:25 in the afternoon, a car starts burning, and then the alarm center receives the alarm, and the fire service was dispatched, and the first fire trucks leave the stations, and after that a manual alarm button was activated in the parking building. And then the first fire trucks arrive from the fire and rescue service. At the same time, the airport control center receives the call from the heliport, and the airport fire and rescue service was dispatched. At about 10 minutes into the fire, the vehicle type that had started burning was identified to be an Opel Zafira, so not an electric vehicle. And then the first airport fire truck was in place after 19 minutes. So if we zoom out and look at the timeline of the fire for the full 48 hours when the fire lasted, the car starts burning at 0 minutes, and then all people are reported evacuated from the building. After that, there was considerable smoke production, and the message to the police was that the building can collapse after, and this was after an hour and a half at high temperatures. And because the potential of collapse, all units were told to evacuate the building, and after that, parts of the building started to collapse. Building 3 collapsed after 2 hours, and after 10 hours there were still fires going on in the building and plenty of smoke. After 26 hours, the fire service returned to the station, and there was still smoke coming from the 3rd floor after 44 hours. The incident was terminated by the fire service after 48 hours. And during this incident, the winds were around 10 to 19 meters per second. So here you can see a sketch of the fire scene. The black X marks the fire start, and the green is the seemingly undamaged vehicles, and pink marks the damage to construction. And you can see the pink X, it marks where the building has collapsed. And you can see the wind direction at the bottom here, so you see a very clear fire fan pattern here. When it comes specifically to the mitigation effort for vehicles, as I said, the first cars that started burning, the fire started in a car, And then this involved that the fire service got a notice of car on fire. And this is quite a different call out than if you have the call out for building on fire. And then after 15 minutes, you could hear several bangs from EVs. And there was a danger of spreading to 3 to 4 cars. And then after 16 to 18 minutes, there were observed flames, bangs, and there were several cars on fire. And about 10 cars were on fire after 18 minutes into the fire. And the total number of vehicles that were involved in the fire, we don't have the exact numbers, but it's approximated to a few hundred electric vehicles. And this is based on the availability of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles in Norway, and that those driving to an airport is expected to have higher amounts of newer vehicles. So, what caused the fire to spread so rapidly? Here you can see a picture from inside of the fire scene. And during the fire, first water was used, and then it was decided to change extinguishing tactics from using water to using foams. And it's not logged exactly when this decision was made. And several of the vehicles in the parking facility had melting of their fuel tanks, which gave leakages and spilling and running of fuel. And the off-gassing from these leakages ignited fires in new areas. And once they started using foam as an extinguishing measure, they put a lid on top of the fuel and thereby removing off-gassing. And in our evaluation, we found that the foam should perhaps have been considered at an earlier stage. However, at the early stages, they needed to have good throwing capacity of the extinguishing means, and then foam is not so good for that as water. And then Avinor and the fire brigade, they collaborated during the efforts, which was also important. Once they started using foam, they had good effect on extinguishing the fire, and they eliminated the problem and gradually began to take down the fire. And after this fire, there was a lot of discussions in Norway about electric vehicles and speculations on how they had contributed to the fire. So our mandate also included a question on how electric vehicles contributed to the fire. And our observations, or our evaluation says that observations during the fire indicate that electric vehicles did not contribute to the fire development beyond what is expected from conventional vehicles. And this is based on visual observations from the fire service. So, the early phases of the handling had quite a few challenges. First, there was no direct alarm going to the alarm central, and it took 8 minutes before the alarm central was noticed. And there were no active fire safety measures in place, for example, extinguishing systems. And there was an available handheld extinguisher, but it was not used. And we also found that there was a lacking of an incident action plan for this specific object. And this meant that the fire services had quite a few challenges in accessing the fire, because their large vehicles couldn't enter the building. And it was also challenging to find the fire hydrants, and there were long distances within the building to access the fire. So the fire service had to disconnect hoses and connect them again and have a lot of back and forward before really getting started. And then, since it was used foam during this incident, a part of our mandate was also to look at the environmental impact of this extinguishing foam. So in the stippled area here, you can see the airport. And then to the left, you can see the water cleaning park from the airport, or where the waters from the airport is gathered. And then the outlet is here. And the Sola Strand Nature Reserve is also to the west of the airport here. And there was a lot of extinguishing foam used during the incident, but we found all in all that it led to a limited environmental impact. The extinguishing foam was found not to add any substantial amount of PFAS during the extinguishing efforts, and this is based on analysis performed by COVI. And then there were some dead fish in the nature reserve here because of oxygen depletion, but this was mostly a local toxic effect and not long-lasting. To the north of the airport, there is a sparsely populated area, and in the beginning of the fire, the wind direction went in this direction. It also means that the wind was not spreading smoke towards the airport terminal buildings. So during the first period of the fire, there was only a very limited impact of the smoke spreading. But it did affect the evacuation of a nearby hotel. Eventually, during the fire, the wind turned into the direction of the more densely populated area on the east side. And a population warning was therefore sent out. And based on that there were only a few health consultations, 11 at the emergency room and 2 in the hospital, as well as based on the municipality's assessment of the incident, we have found that the fire smoke had limited health consequences for the neighbors. When it comes to the environmental impact specifically from the electric vehicles, water analysis of selected metals relevant for batteries were done, but they did not show any lithium and only low concentrations of cobalt. And this indicates that batteries in electric vehicles did not contribute to pollution of the nearby water resources, which is very good. And to summarize the learning points so far in the presentation, there are quite a few learning points from the firefighting efforts identified, and you can read more about that in our report. And when it comes to electric vehicles, observations indicate that they did not contribute to the fire development beyond what is expected from conventional vehicles. And there was a limited environmental impact, both on the extinguishing foam and the smoke. And now moving to the fire safety design of the building. So first, for your information, Norway has performance-based fire building regulations, and parking garages with more than 1 floor is placed in risk class 2 out of a total of 6. And we also have fire classes 1 to 4, and this building was placed in fire class 3. And the regulations says that a building should be placed in fire class 4 if a fire there can have particularly large consequences for life, health, environment, and society. And under society, infrastructure and airports are mentioned. And here you can see the 3 different building steps, and the different parts of the parking garage were built according to different regulations. And here you can find details in the report. And like I said before, we have focused on building steps B and C, since A was not affected by the fire. And we found that the changes of the regulations during the building time for this building might have caused some confusion. Here you can see building step B and building step C, and they are designed using a more or less identical fire safety concept, but the execution is quite different. So this is interesting. And a major learning point from this evaluation is that it is important to avoid uncritical reuse of content from older engineering concepts, especially when fire regulations have been updated between one and the other. When it comes to load-bearing capacities, the pre-accepted performance level for the main load-bearing system was R90, and for some circumstances you can lower it to R15, but this was not applicable for the Sola case. And in the Sola case, the fire strategy actually deviated from pre-accepted performance and was at R10. And when it comes to sectioning, here you can see an overview of the maximum area per floor allowed without sectioning for different expected specific fire loads. And the relevant area in this case is marked by red. However, the actual floor area involved in this fire and in this building here was quite a lot larger. So, what were the key learning points from this incident when it comes to fire safety design. We found that the fire safety design had shortcomings with the load-bearing capacities and with sectioning, and possibly also on the extinguishing system. We see that a holistic safety philosophy and approach is important, but was missing. And we recommend that you avoid uncritical reuse of content from older fire engineering concepts, and that a parking facility in immediate proximity to important infrastructure for society might need some different considerations from a parking facility in the middle of an open field. The multi-storey car park should have been placed in fire class 4 according to our evaluation, since it was adjacent to important infrastructure for society. And we see that the confusion in the different regulation changes were there. So we recommend to the authorities that when regulation changes are made, the changes should be emphasized more in detail than they are today. And we see that the regulations regarding wall openings need to be revised. And now my colleague will tell you more about our follow-up study.
Thank you. Yeah, the reason for the follow-up study is that in Norway, you actually can reduce the fire resistance of the main load-bearing system if you provide large opening on the walls. So if you have more than 1/3 opening degree. And in order to investigate how this opening degree actually affects the fire on the different wind conditions, that's very important, we conducted 10 simulations where we looked at different opening degrees. Where we had one generic parking car park with 21% opening degree, and then a second one with 41% opening degree. Here we show you some examples. On the right-hand side, you see 2 figures for 2 different simulations. The small squares symbolize the cars, and all colored cars basically have been part of the fire, where red color means they were involved early in the fire, and blue colors means they were involved late in the fire. And then the numbers give you actually the precise time until the cars were ignited. And what you can see for wind conditions, where the wind comes here from the side, so it blows along the rows of cars with a low wind velocity of 3 meters per second. We actually see that the more enclosed car park involved much more cars, and we got a much larger fire. So you see also overlaid the total heat release rate for a fire. On the bottom, the large opening degree helps to ventilate flue gases out and actually limits the fire spread to 1 row of cars. In contrast, if you look at the same car park, same wind direction, but now we have high wind speed, then we actually see that the number of cars involved in the fire were actually the same. In both cases, it was limited to 1 row, but the spreading rate is much larger for the more open car park because you have higher wind velocities helping here the fire to spread if the car park is more open. So actually in the figure below you see all cars were involved after 23 minutes, while it took 40 minutes for the more closed car park. So we can say that large openings in the car park design actually can help to ventilate flue gas out and minimize the fire spread in total, but it's very dependent on weather conditions and wind conditions. So you can have favorable wind conditions where actually the opening degree or large opening degree has a negative effect. And because of that, our conclusion is actually that you should not reduce the fire resistance of the main load-bearing system. And as we said in the beginning, we wanted to present today how the solar fire also affects regulations. At the moment, regulations in Norway for this have not been changed, but we recommend that these regulations are revised based on our findings.
Yeah, So more results both from the fire evaluation case and from the follow-up study you can find in the 3 RISE reports here. And you can also find a poster and a paper from the FIEP 2023 conference proceedings. A big thank you to all of the authors from these reports. And the studies were funded by the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection and the Norwegian Building Authority. And parts of this presentation has been presented at the FIEP conference in 2021 and at the FIEP Learning from Fires webinar in 2025. And those presentations were sponsored by FRIC. FRIC is funded by Gjensidigestiftelsen, but by the partners and by the Research Council of Norway. And thank you for listening.